Hi, my name is Monica Kretschmer, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Universal Women's Network, Woman of Inspiration Awards, and this is the Woman of Inspiration podcast, where we speak with women who lead, inspire, and motivate. Now, today I have a very special guest on the podcast. She is a creative powerhouse who has been shaping the way that we connect with brands, ideas, and stories for over 2 decades. Vida Cornelious is a senior vice president and creative for the New York Times Advertising, where she leads T Brand Studio, the award winning creative studio that develops bespoke brand content infused with unmatched storytelling for the New York Times. Her career is a master class in cross industry creative leadership with experience spanning the world's most respected publishers, global brands, and top advertising agencies. She has held leadership roles at Walt Disney, and served as the chief creative officer at Fake Love and the Hello Society, many, many other roles. And of course, expanding T Brand's reach and redefining experiences in the process. Vida's work has not only moved brands forward, it has deepened the emotional connections with audiences, won international recognitions at Cannes Lions to set the new creative standards across industries. This conversation is about creativity at its highest level and also leading with purpose while amplifying women and the power of storytelling. So, welcome, Vida, to the Woman of Inspiration podcast. I'm thrilled to have you.
Well, thank you. I mean, that was quite the introduction. I would be kind of inspired if I didn't know me. You made me sound really good. I appreciate all of that. That's awesome.
Well, I absolutely love doing introductions because, they're the hardest thing as women when we sit here and hear about our greatness, right? And so I think we should get used to that. We should get used to that a lot. So let's start spreading that even more. But, Vida, as I mentioned, your career spans over 2 decades across publishing, branding, and advertising. Can you take us through that journey and some pivotal moments along the way on your career?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely started my career in advertising, traditional agencies. Started out with big ambitions, as an art director, junior art director. Was very inspired, growing up by TV shows like Who's the Boss and and Bewitched, right? Those were your kind of like first introductions to the world of advertising. But I always kind of had a feeling that I wanted to be in a creative field. So I had the luxury and great fortune of having a professor early on in my college days that kind of steered me towards advertising as a career. So forging my way into the ad world and kind of moving up through the ranks there gave me lots of opportunities to have great mentors, to work with amazing clients, to have quite a few pivotal moments, but moments of growth, where I was able to kind of move forward with under the guidance of some kind of ad legends that I was able to cross paths with. And then got to a point in my career where I felt like it was the appropriate time for a pivot, and had an opportunity to move over to the brand side. So after leading creative teams, being a chief creative officer at agencies, had an opportunity to move over to the brand side, and kind of get an opportunity to see that infamous how the sausage is made. When you're a creative, you're always sitting on one side of the table, so it gets to be a great education when you're able to sit on the client side of the table and actually understand how the brand thinks about itself. So that experience at Walt Disney was amazing, being able to be at such a storied brand and learn from some of the best people in the business, creative wise. And then after that experience, having an opportunity to come to the New York Times. And I think because I was working within the Walt Disney kind of parks and resorts area and having the opportunity to really lead a team and also support, the creative leader of our group, which was Yellow Shoes, being able to see how we could transform creativity for a film into what would become like a in-person or live experience, kind of gave me both sides of that marketing coin in terms of how you like lead the creative ideation of something that's storytelling, from a film side to what becomes an actual experience. So coming to New York Times, my foot in the door there was through Fake Love and Hello Society, and Fake Love was an experiential agency. So being able to lead the charge for those additional capabilities that were going to be added to T Brand was the opportunity that I had coming into the New York Times. As fate would have it, however, the pandemic had other plans for the world of experiential, so that made for a little bit of a hard pivot there. But fortunately, I was able to come into the New York Times full stop and become part of the creative team, which is T Brand, and where I now sit as the head of that team. So, kind of a short story, I guess, if you will, but some of the amazing moments that kind of shaped that journey. One I would say was pretty defining early on in my career. When I was in the agency world, I had a great mentor who was also our chief creative officer, and I worked under him for several years. Kind of pulling up right behind him as he ascended to the top of the agency. But unfortunately, he committed suicide. And it
Oh,
became a really, really pivotal moment, not just for the agency. It was a highly publicized moment, in the industry in terms of who he was and his stature. But it really did leave it in a mark on the agency to some degree, but from that point on, it really did make me think deeply about my own career, about career choices, about the importance of work-life balance and maintaining that, how to show up authentically, how to, think about personal value alignment when it comes to an organization and when you're joining an organization, and leadership roles and basically the pressure that goes along with those jobs. So there was quite a bit that was very personal for me to kind of extract from that moment, even though it was one that was very dark, for many reasons within the industry, but also within the agency. So I felt like I learned from that. And even though he was no longer with us, I felt like in some ways he was still kind of guiding, some of the choices and things I was thinking about going forward.
beautiful. So there's a lot to unpack in your journey. So I'm going to start with probably where you talk about balance because it's always been a topic for women that are navigating their careers. But what is your take on balance? Is it really bullshit or you know, like do you believe there is balance?
I believe, honestly, I do believe there can be balance, right? Because I think another word that we can attach to balance is boundaries. I think when you ascribe a certain level of boundary to how you want to show up, in what way you are willing to truly lean all the way in, and I know we've heard that term before, but lean all the way in, and the moments that you can afford to lean out, I think it's very important to kind of ascertain what that is for you personally, and at different phases of your career, and the demands of one's life are what drive the choices that you make. I feel that very profoundly, even for myself. I could have easily stayed on the West Coast. I could have pursued another role, say within the West Coast or California area. I was talking to another large brand before I took the job with the New York Times, but the personal moment that I knew I was going to be confronting was being closer to home, meaning being closer to the East Coast so that I could take care of an elderly parent.
Mm.
So that makes you make different decisions. So I think when it comes to balance, yes, it's kind of a loaded word in a way for women to think about, because I think balance implies that you have to give something up, but I don't necessarily think that's true. I think it's more about, like I said, assigning boundaries and where you feel like you have firm ones and where you have ones that are a little bit more porous and you're willing to make, changes as necessary. But I think the important thing for you to be good at any job is to first and foremost understand what feeds you personally and how to
So let
balance.
me ask you this. Who were some of those females that you aspired or had learned from, or did you just navigate this career and, have to learn by trial and error?
I feel like it was a little bit of both. I mean, truly coming up in the creative advertising space, right? In the creative agency space, there were many years that the creative department was male dominated. You didn't have any female leaders to really look up to and say, "Oh, I love how she's doing it," specifically, or, following in someone's footsteps. In the early phase of my career, honestly, a lot of my bosses were male. They were male and they had very clear delineations that they were able to work hard and all night and this and that because they had a wifey at home that was going to do all the parental stuff. So there wasn't a whole lot of guidance in terms of feeling like as a woman, would you be looked at as someone who is a little bit of a liability on a team if you decided to have a family, things like that. And
Mm.
I know that that's 100% what a lot of women will deal with, and those questions will come up. I think where I kind of looked for guidance was just looking outside of advertising in general at women that I felt were just making very good moves in their careers, people that I respected. For example, Carla Harris, who's a very well-known name at Morgan Stanley, chairwoman of Morgan Stanley. Rosalind Brewer was another person I watched her career very early on in my career. She's the former CEO of Walgreens, for example. And those were two women that I always felt like moved through their business world with a level of grace and confidence. And it never seemed as if they were compromising on themselves in any way. So I felt like from afar, those were people that I admired for sure.
And I hope we're going to tag them. So I hope they
Oh,
actually
great.
will hear because I find that a lot of times, we as leaders, we have no idea the people that we touch, the ripple that
Yep.
happens. And so while we're head down doing what we do on a daily basis, we have no idea the ripple that it causes or the people that make changes to their life that are impacted by some of the actions that they see, positive or
Yeah.
negative.
Yeah, just seeing the way other people navigate, how they've crafted, I don't know if we'll talk about it all, but how they've crafted their superpowers, in terms of what they're known for or the through line that seems to lead their career, you know, um, yeah, I definitely feel as though there's some people who have done that well and and as women have shown up very well in spaces that doesn't seem as if they're compromising on their womanhood. At one point it seemed like in order to make it in advertising, you had to join the boys club. You had to be one of those women that was the only woman in the room. And that kind of feeling was not good at times. There were definitely times I've seen that over the course of my career, but I chose to kind of focus my energy at looking at women that I felt really did support other women, and recognize women as equals and as a shared sort of like responsibility to bring them along.
We call that lead by example.
Yes.
Right? That is probably the biggest thing is to lead by example and, leave that trail open for some other woman to walk through the same path that we've chosen.
Mhm.
Now, you talk briefly about the agency world and advertising and media in general being so male dominated. So, take me through the changes. I mean, when you're naming off Bewitched, girl, you're my era. And so, how have you seen those changes? Like I am seeing the changes happening. And so I'd like to sort of infuse a little bit more of inspiration for those leaders like yourself who have been there, but now see this new horizon. And I want to bring some hope to the table. So
Oh,
maybe
oh
you can
yeah.
walk me through some of the positives that we've seen of owning our voices as women in male dominated industries.
Yeah, and I would definitely say the world of male domination in the ad industry and the creative spaces I speak of is many, many years behind us. Thank goodness, you know what I mean? That was when I started in the 90s, if you will. But I would say for sure pioneering folks women that I love and personally would love to shout out, like Kat Gordon, who started the 3% conference. I mean, I can remember going to literally her first 3% conference where the conversation was about there's only 3% women who are in creative roles and agencies, and how she literally started a movement around, propelling women forward and making sure that they had the adequate mentorship and roles and opportunities and the diverse, moments that would help kind of reshape and reframe females and women being in leadership roles and creative spaces. So I feel like for sure she's someone who was a pioneer in that way. I don't know if she would say that, but I feel like she was because I remember so vividly going to that very first conference of hers and how exciting it was. And I think since then, it's just literally become, women are always been been very competent, but obviously, there's far more roles for women who have decided to push into STEM careers, for example, and have found themselves being in even alternative creative spaces like gaming. And of course, we see the world of AI having a lot more females in those spaces of STEM and kind of creative tech, if you will. So I feel like that has continued to open the aperture, even more so for creative women to be in leadership positions, to be out front. Of course, there have been agencies that have been basically founded by women. Joan is one of the ones that obviously is very popular and known for its, kind of emergence on the scene and its prowess and being a great agency led by a woman. So I feel as though, we've just continued to see moments where women have kind of led the charge, and not only just from the creative side, but also we're seeing more women who are in the marketing seats, within brands. They're making the decisions. They're making the decisions on the work. So that's also incredibly inspiring.
I love to see the woman power. And you talked a little bit about some of your mentors also being what we call support hers. And so I'd like to talk about their role because I think that's really important. We can have the woman that we aspire to be, we can have the woman, you know, creating these opportunities, but it shouldn't be all on our shoulders to continue making that happen. And so, support hers in our world are the men that are champions for women in their networks, the workplace, and communities. Because really, the conversation starts at home. It starts anywhere that you have a conversation. And so, maybe you can share a little bit more about some of those support hers that have helped you along in your journey and why it's so important that we invite men to the conversation.
Well, for one, the gentleman I spoke of who committed suicide was probably one of the earliest ones. Um, and even though that was a huge personal hurdle to kind of have to navigate past, because he was such a incredible presence and just helping me develop as a young creative, he's someone that I really do put a lot of credence in some of the early kind of help and assistance that he gave me and lessons, even if I didn't know I was being taught any lessons at the time. um there's kind of a moment I always like to reference for people, and when he kind of tested me, and it kind of taught me that notion of like, always being ready, this idea of being ready, because he kind of threw me into the fire at some point to present a major pitch, that he just wasn't available for all of a sudden, and became a thing. But it was one of those testing moments where that really did propel me to my next step.
Mm.
Outside of him, there's definitely been, like, clients that I've worked with that have been very supportive. Rather they were interested in bringing you into the fold of, say, an ERG that was within their organization, and they, even though you were outside creative partner, bringing you into that ERG to be a part of that team and really feel like a partner to their team. So I've had some clients that were very support hers, if you will. And that was also an opportunity to, support the work that your team is doing, supporting, big initiatives that they're entrusting you with as a marketing partner. So those became big proving grounds and big moments for the agency teams that I was leading to have a massive spotlight, work on the Super Bowl, things like that, you know.
Super exciting.
Yeah.
So I love the fact that you're like, I got it. Not that you're given a choice, but I find that women are in those situations all the time where there's an opportunity,
Hmm.
but it's that uncomfortable zone. I'm not ready. So,
Yeah.
what's your take on that? Have you always been, I'm ready, I'm going to take it, I'm going to figure it out? Or have you ever pulled back?
I think I'm a little bit, it's funny, we just went through some like development training here at the times. We had a fantastic development day, which was like a all in, kind of opportunity for our whole team. And one of the courses that I took that day was, effective communication. And so I definitely said, I think I'm a driver with a tinge of expressive, in myself in terms of the category I fall in. So I say driver because I've never really been that afraid of a challenge, especially when you're younger. You just sort of grab the bull and say, okay, I'm going to go for this. Um, it wasn't about, I don't feel as though it was ever about being afraid as much as it was about testing your own limits And I think I also looked at it like, if this person has confidence in me that I can do it, then clearly I can, you know. And that was a little bit how I looked at it. I never wanted to spend too much time wallowing in the, oh, I'm afraid, or what if I fail, because you only get one opportunity sometimes, and sometimes failing is a part of that opportunity. So I just kind of never looked away from those type of challenges. Um, even for example, that story that I was referencing a minute ago. I mean, it was one of these moments where we had a big presentation. Up to that point, I was always the girl that would assemble the bag for my boss. I put all the storyboards in and all the scripts and everything and have it all neat and tidy for him. And I was like the only person that would go to the meeting with him and sit in the back of the room. And at first I thought, like, why do I have to be the one that's like always schlepping the bag? Like, how come none of these boys on the team ever get to pull, get pulled in and do that? And I almost at first thought maybe this is a little bit like subservience because I'm the only female on the team. But then when I thought about it, I said, wait a minute, I'm also the only one that gets to be up close and see what's being said in these rooms. I'm also the only one that gets to see all of the work and hear all the comments in the room. So I started turning that around and using that as a moment of empowerment. So when that day came where he said, hey, I'm not going to be in the meeting, but Vita's there, she can do it. It was because I had been with him to probably 10 meetings, 15 meetings at that point. So he knew I knew how he would do it. And I did. I presented it. We won it. I presented it literally off of like Xerox copies that I happen to have in my bag because I didn't even have the work because he had it at home. It was the one time I gave him the bag to take home. Usually I would take the bag home and bring it to the meeting just for the purpose of not being sure he would remember everything. And, yeah, and so I literally, had to present that work off of Xeroxes, and we still won the pitch, so it was that was one of those defining moments where it's like, "Yep, okay. Let's go."
I love that story so much. I really do, because sometimes you're like, why am I taking the notes? Why do I have access to all of the
Yeah.
contacts? Why do I have to be listening to all these inside conversations? Girl,
Yes. Yeah,
that's gold.
yeah, that ended up being gold. That it took me a minute to realize it was, and then it was like, "Wait a minute, I'm getting a view that nobody else gets."
What a great reminder. And I hope that the listeners that are listening kind of look at those odd jobs that might seem insignificant from a different perspective. Look at the golden lining there,
Yeah.
because it is a different perspective and it prepared you for something where he knew you knew everything. Like you knew A to
Yeah.
Z.
Yeah, and I that was really when my ascension started to, like, ACD and creative director and on up. I mean, it was literally like I felt like that was like, "Oh, was that the final test?" Type of thing. But yeah, it became pretty, evident at that point. And it was
Beautiful.
hard because it's like you literally go from being a peer to your coworkers to suddenly being a boss. But because I had done so much work at that point, the team didn't really balk at it. They had already felt like I was kind of taking care of them.
Beautiful. I love that story so much. So I would love to sort of, okay, there's a couple things. So
Uh-huh.
I think we're kind of on that bandwagon here, but I've talked about, putting women into the spotlight and why is it so important for women to be visible in media and leadership.
Mhm.
So how are you, outside of things like this podcast, using your voice to make that change for women in your industry?
Actually, it's interesting. I've definitely spent a lot of time having one-on-one kind of mentorship conversations with women, rather than people seek me out from, things that they've seen me do, rather it's sitting on a panel or being a part of a jury or something along that line. But I never turn anyone down. I'm always open to have a conversation. I'm always open to see how I can assist someone in their journey. I'm kind of a one-on-one person, so rather than anything massive or formal, like starting my own, organization or foundation or something like that, I prefer to be a lot more accessible to people just from a one-on-one perspective. And I feel like I've been doing that for years. I've met many, many people through that kind of method of just being available, and participating in things like panels and, like I said, jury opportunities, anything that allows me to have exposure to my peers in the creative space to better understand how, other leaders, female leaders are navigating, helping other women, or even hearing about openings and roles in places where you can share that information with someone who might need to make a transition or move. To me, I feel like those are the small bridges I like to think I'm building every day.
Beautiful. And, my next question is, we are kind of moving away from that, as they call it, like corporate speak, and leaning into a more authentic voice. And
Mhm.
that was surely a topic, authenticity was a massive, massive topic, as it usually is at Cannes Lions. But it was there again. But why do you think that it is now becoming more important, almost essential for leaders to now be using their authentic voice?
First of all, I don't necessarily think anyone appreciates just being jargoned to death. No one wants to hear the latest jargon or feel like they're just delivering a sound bite that comes from, whatever GPT question they put in. What really resonates with people is feeling like you have a personal connection to whatever it is you're speaking about. You have a personal experience with something that can, help someone else navigate their path. So having an authentic voice to me is really critical with regards to sharing your experiences. My journey as a black woman in this industry is incredibly different than my peers. There are moments I can totally remember seeing overtly a level of bias or, you know, uh, basically, racial, tendencies towards you, your work, your abilities. Um, and they become moments that I can only express openly and authentically because they literally happened to me. I can't talk about them theoretically. I have to talk about them from a very real place. So I think that when people hear that and they know that you're speaking from a place where you actually did have to muster up a certain level of resilience, or you had to pivot, or you had to think differently about the scenario as it was unfolding to you in real time, they can respect that. They can respect that in a different way than if you're just sort of feeling like you're a textbook, leader, just kind of, I've read a certain amount of books, what gets you here won't get you there, like no one wants those quotes all the time. You can read those books for yourself.
I love it because it's the learned experience.
Yeah.
We learn from other people. And by far, we learned from women who've actually made it, because what the 97 or the 7% of women, I think it's raised, but 7% of women are in the C-suite, the CEO role, right? I mean, there's not enough women yet. So we have to learn from the women that have got there.
Yeah, you have to learn from, but I think also it's very important for people to see that there is a level of their journey and where they are that you were at some point, that there is no leapfrogging, that everyone goes through, down points, high points, and navigating them is very important. It makes the difference in how your trajectory, your story unfolds. And sometimes people just want validation that how they're feeling is legitimate and that they're not alone in that feeling. And when you as a leader can say, oh, no, 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 that feeling you're having right now, that's real. It's not in your head. That's helpful. People can appreciate, women can appreciate that, especially.
So let me ask you, you've done a lot in your career and in
Mhm.
your journey. So when we talk about celebrating and why it's so important for women to celebrate their achievements, why do you feel it's so important for women to celebrate their achievements?
It's funny when that question is interesting because I sort of wasn't raised in a household where you spend a lot of time, celebrating what you've done. It was more about, put the feather in your cap and keep going. So I kind of have to actively give myself a moment to sometimes appreciate my achievements, whether it's a quiet reflection or just time spent alone, really thinking about um what I do feel as though I've accomplished and what moments I feel like I'm proud of. And some of those moments might not even be big things. Some of those moments might be a conversation you were able to have, or a door you were able to open at some point, or seeing someone who used to work for you now in their own leadership position, things like that. So I think celebrating those accomplishments has to be something that you, regardless of anyone else gives you your flowers, that you will always give yourself flowers. You always have to. Um, and I do think sometimes as women, we're expecting a certain level of validation from the outside. We want that. We want it to make us feel legitimized in some way, particularly in this type of industry, and where you're oftentimes only judged by the last thing you did. So I think as women, it's important to reach out maybe to another woman that has done something great and just send her a note of affirmation to say, "Oh my God, I saw that thing that you did, and that's amazing. That's not easy. I see you." It's like sometimes it's just that simple. And those are the things that people need to just be reminded that regardless of if you think no one is paying attention to you, people are.
Oh, yes. I couldn't agree with that more. And that's why we created the Woman of Inspiration Awards. It was about celebrating the achievements of women across all industries and just really valuing. And I have to say, Vida, that it was the women that have achieved so much success. They're like, who, me? They were the most surprised. It, I kid you not, the most surprised.
Yeah, it's funny, like, I did a couple of panels that I moderated at Cannes, and, the opening similar to what you've done this afternoon, you're reading this person's accomplishments, and I literally was like, "We only have 30 minutes, so I'm gonna have to stop because your list of accomplishments would be this entire panel." So I do, I have to acknowledge the fact that clearly you were on a roll between this year and this year because you have so many, accolades listed here. But we're gonna have to get to the matter at hand. So it's always nice to basically make the little bit of a jest or a joke to the fact that I so see that there is so much to you that needs to be recognized, but we just need to know that like this is a testament to the fact that you clearly got this. And sometimes
And this is why you here. You have arrived. Super. So I want to talk a little bit about the T brand studio.
yeah. Mhm.
Tell us, like, share with all our listeners a little bit about that. And, it's blending the brands with the New York Times journalist experience. So how do you approach that? And, in a compelling storytelling way. And why is storytelling still even more powerful now than it ever was?
Yeah, I mean, well, T Brand is the content studio within New York Times Advertising. So our role is literally to when brands want to advertise on the Times, our job at T Brand is to make sure that we can craft the most relevant, compelling storytelling that's going to be of interest to our audiences. It's going to attach those advertisers to our audiences, and also hopefully put them at the center of cultural moments. That is what we aspire to do. The team definitely operates from a place of inspired, imaginative storytelling that's really backed by investigative rigor, because we're very cognizant of the fact that our work lives on the platform and it lives amongst our journalism, and we want it to be an additive part of the reader experience, and not distract from it. So the goal is always to make sure that the work that we're doing feels very much like it's befitting of the platform, rather in its look, its feel, its design, but most importantly in the writing and the quality of the journalism that we deliver on behalf of brands. The storytelling aspect of T Brand is definitely fueled by what we call our storytelling commitment. And that really is our sort of internal pledge, and also our pledge that we give to clients to be very, forthright about representing the audiences that we hope to reach. We want to make sure we're working with a variety of makers and voices and individuals who can fuel our storytelling in a way that keeps it authentic and relevant, but also appropriate for the audiences we want to reach. So we're truly committed to the fact that like how can you help people understand the world if you're not willing to reflect the world that you hope to reach? So that's why it's really important for us to stay true to that as a sort of like a baseline of how we develop our storytelling. The team is comprised of several disciplines of makers. We have designers, creative technicians, developers, um, video producers, editors, copywriters, as well as creative directors on the team. And all of them work together to deliver, oh my gosh, an incredible volume of work. I'm always really, kind of blown away about how much work we do when I pull the data at the end of the year. But all of the different clients that we service, and the different formats that we create in for our platform, whether it's in print or digital, or creating custom podcasts or video series. These are all kind of formats we work in every day. So yeah, the studio has been around roughly 10 years, and I'm definitely looking forward to all the new frontier that's ahead of us, and ways that we can continue to expand our capabilities, but also our wingspan for all the brands that we work with. Yeah.
So what gets you most excited about what's coming up?
I think, of course, the industry is very much having its love affair with video. We know that people love video more than anything. And video storytelling is something that our team is been very adept at. But I'm looking forward to moving us into a space of potentially branded entertainment, finding a brand that's willing to tell a longer story, something that feels more like a short film or a documentary format. I definitely feel as though we have the storytelling capability for it, the story finding ability for it, and the credibility. So I would love to see T Brand have a marquee film in collaboration with Brand X, to bring forward an amazing story and see it streaming somewhere, or available somewhere. So that would be kind of like my forward thinking aspiration for the studio.
Oh, I love it. I could see it.
Yeah,
My
definitely.
thinker's on. We should have one about women. Women doing
Well, yeah.
extraordinary things.
Hey, I will honestly say, one of the shout out to the Vox team, because often when I think about, I want to do that. They did a great film with KitchenAid and Hulu a few years ago called A Woman's Place, that was exploring inequities of women in the culinary industry and in the restaurant industry. And it was a great film, that they were able to do with their client. And I've always looked at it as a model to say, that's what I mean. That's the kind of storytelling I'd love to see us bring to the forefront for a brand. So we're gonna get there. We're gonna do it.
Well, I have no doubt with you in the leadership arm that you're going to just go get that and make it happen. And I'm looking forward to hearing a lot about it on the way. And I do have some ideas to pitch you, by the way. So,
Okay.
this has been a really fascinating podcast. And, I had a whole list of questions to ask you. And I hope that we'll continue the conversation again, because I do think that the knowledge that you shared is the knowledge that other women really need to hear. But I want to sort of ask you a little bit more about how would you say, it's a woman of inspiration podcast. So I'd really love to know about, the women that you've looked up to that have inspired your journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned two, which was Rosalind Brewer and Carla Harris, just from the outside looking in, of people who have been very successful in their careers, and have navigated themselves with much respect and poise. A little closer into me, I would say, someone that I definitely want to give a huge kudos to is Amber Guild. She is my former boss here at the New York Times. She did move on, but she was the person who brought me into T Brand. And she's always been a great supporter of me. She's incredibly thoughtful, incredibly transparent, a vulnerable leader, always very kind, always willing to share intimately, and really is someone who roots for you. So I respect her immensely, and I'm always very grateful for her for bringing me in here, but also creating a pathway way for me to continue to succeed here. So she's someone who is immediately close to me. And then I would say, outside of the world of advertising entirely, and it's going to sound probably cliche, but my mother is, an amazing person. And, I have four sisters. So she and my dad, my parents raised five girls. We all are third generation college grads and graduate school graduates. And she really had to, set aside many of her own creative aspirations to just make sure that she was very present for us growing up. So I'm immensely grateful for that. I get my creative bent from her because she was an opera singer. She used to sing at the Met,
Wow.
a little while in her early years, and had to, kind of move away from that over time. But, she was kind of the one that always was very supportive of all of our creative endeavors and, being okay with us pursuing, careers and ideas about what we wanted to be that weren't your traditional, doctor, lawyer type of thing. So even though we have a lawyer in the family, my sister, no slight to lawyers, my sister is a lawyer, but but it was my mom who was always very present and always very much rooting for us in the background. So
Beautiful. I love the shout outs to the women in your world. I mean, we need to put women into the spotlight. It's so uncomfortable for most. And so, you said that's not a space that you tend to really, go for. But why is it so important for women to own that space? And how can we encourage more women to do that?
I mean, I think it just comes with a level of maybe even a little bit of self-preservation, because you have to always believe in you. You always have to have some place, some little well within yourself that you can dip into and pull yourself up, no matter what's going on around you. So I think it's really important to have that ability to do that for yourself, whether you ever get the kudos you need from outside, that you always have to cultivate a little bit of a fire inside for yourself. So I'm a firm believer in that. Um, I also feel as though it's really important for women to have, like we talked about, balance and boundaries before. Making sure you have relationships outside of your industry. Oftentimes when I talk about mentors, or I've heard other people even talk about mentors, they talk about it as like a board of directors, right? So I
Mhm.
always say you have life mentors, you have work mentors, but you have people that also just are mentors for your life. And I think it's important for women to make sure they have those as well. Don't just have people who are connected to your industry or your aspirations, but just people who can help you navigate your life, who can help you make good decisions, who can help you um, just maintain a level of balance and sanity for yourself, and health, mental health, and ways that you can just continue to affirm your own worth. That's really important. And that won't come from people who you work with. That kind of comes from an inner circle that you have to cultivate over time.
Beautiful. And there is an inner circle, and there is an outer circle, and there
Yeah.
is another outer circle.
Yes,
So
yes,
guard those inner circles with
yes.
your life, and literally, they
Yeah,
are sometimes your life support. So,
yeah.
it's really, I love to always remind everybody, and thank you so much for sharing that part with our listeners because we do need to be reminded of how important that is. We don't do it alone.
Mhm, mhm.
Nothing
Yeah,
alone.
yeah.
Um, and this wouldn't be a Woman of Inspiration podcast without asking you what your definition of a woman of inspiration is.
I would say my definition of a woman of inspiration would be, um, someone who is standing tall, who is proud of who she is, but not afraid to, know that she always is growing and changing and evolving, that the creativity in one's life is never stagnant. There's something to be learned from everywhere and anywhere. And that openness is what keeps her light shining always.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Let's keep that light shining.
I
And I
love
have a couple little rapid fire questions just because I'm so darn curious. If you had one woman that you were going to hold, that if I said, Vida, you get to interview any woman on this planet, who would she be?
Okay, it's probably gonna sound cliche again, but I would have to say Michelle Obama.
Where is she? There
Oh,
we go.
yeah. Look at that. You did it. Oh my God.
But I didn't interview her. We had a short conversation, but I gave her a little string, and I couldn't take anything in, so I tucked it in my bra. And then when we did the interview, I'm like, Michelle, and I got like literally not very long. And then she tucked it around and she held it in her arm.
Oh,
So
wow.
we haven't done an interview yet.
Yes, she would be my pseudo girl crush slash just love her whole story and would love to, I know she shared it many times, but I'm sure there's always some question to be asked that maybe hasn't been asked before. But um I especially am interested in I watch her now, intermittently, but I watch her now and I know it's like personally hard probably for her having lost her mother in recent months. I think her mother passed last year, maybe, or towards the end of last year. And that existentially changes a person. I'm very fortunate that my mother and father are still alive, but I know that can change someone, especially so much so in the experience she had with the White House and her mother being so intimately connected to that. So it's interesting to see how she's now navigating life differently. You can see it kind of how she's showing up these days. So
Oh, absolutely. I was at the house in Chicago because my girlfriend is in Chicago and she took me to the house where she grew up. And then where they called it Presidential Street, the house that they lived in before they went to the White House.
yeah.
And sort of we talked about that whole thing with her mom and Barack and how they were all watching what's going on and their next big move was into the White House. So it's phenomenal. And yes, I would love to do that as well. Maybe we'll have to organize something. Michelle, if you're listening, call us.
Right. We can do it as a tag team.
Yeah, yeah. We'll be there, Michelle. Anyways, Vida, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the Woman of Inspiration podcast. And, I say that every woman has a story. Your story doesn't define you, it empowers you. And thank you for being so authentic on sharing your stories and your journey. I know that that's just the tip of the iceberg. So hopefully we'll have an opportunity to revisit that again. But thank you so much for joining the Women of
Yeah.
Inspiration podcast. And the listeners, if you enjoyed this, where can they find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, of course. I'm there. I'm also on Instagram, of course. I'm on Facebook, of course. I don't necessarily use a bunch of X or threads, but you can definitely find me on Instagram, Facebook, and most importantly, LinkedIn. Yeah. I'm updating my website, in the next, I don't know, month or two. I need to update it. So
Beautiful. So
Yep.
they can find you, your first name, last name, the comments, the
Yeah.
links will have all of the information there and they can get a hold of you. Any last and final comments that you want to share with our audience today?
Other than just, always feel good about there's a quote, if I could share a quote, there's a quote that I definitely love. I collect quotes in my phone. They're called, quotes to remember. And there's a quote by James Carey Marshall that I love. And he's a visual artist. If you don't know him, look him up. He's an amazing, black artist. But he talks about mastery. And with the superpower conversation I know we were having earlier, one of the things I look at is your superpower is what you are mastering in your life, right? So what are you willing to master? So he says the lack of mastery makes you vulnerable to the imposition of someone else's will. Once you have mastered something, you decide how far to go. So I love that. It really is a way of saying that when you own something, that is your value, that is your worth, that is your superpower, and you create your own destiny from that.
I'm gonna just like do like the mic drop there
Yeah.
because that
I
was golden.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love that quote. I
James
haven't heard
Clear
that quote
Marshall.
before. Thank you so
Yeah,
much for sharing.
he's awesome. I mean, it's definitely like I always say, talented people have options. So keep your talent.
So go out there and don't doubt. Just go straight forward and embrace all your superpowers. Vida, it was an absolute pleasure. And thank you so much again.
Thank you.
And I look forward to chapter 2 with
Okay.
Michelle.
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's
Okay.
do that, girl. Thank you so much. And again, listeners, if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it widely and tag another women in your network that needs to hear this conversation.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Monica.
Thank you.